Welcome to America at its Best. My name is Rebecca Painter, and I'm your host for today's show. I'm so glad you're able to join us and hear about some good news that you are making possible. And today is no exception. We're in a spot in history right now when Americans need help. They need money back in their pockets, and you've helped put money back in their pockets right now. Things are expensive. Gas is expensive, eggs are expensive, milk's expensive, healthcare, childcare, everything. And I don't care if you're rich, if you're poor, or if you're the supposable middle class, you are feeling the squeeze right now. Everybody I talk with is telling me they're feeling the squeeze. And as we look to the federal government, what we're hearing in terms of solutions is, well, we'll raise taxes. Their solution is very far removed from the people who are being hurt right now. And it just shows how out of touch our federal government is with people in our country. Thank goodness we've got 50 states out there. Thank goodness we have you guys out there supporting this network and the leaders in it who are working towards different solutions. Thanks to you guys, 7 states so far this year have already cut taxes in their states while the federal government is talking about raising them. 7 states have cut taxes. 7 states have put money back in the pockets of the people who live in their states at a time when they need it most. Thank you for making that possible. Today, we are going to be joined by Grant Callen, the CEO of Empower Mississippi, who led the way in his state, and John Hendrickson from Iowans for Tax Relief. And we're going to hear their stories of how this is happening in their states and how we can help it spread all across the country. Throughout the course of our conversation, if you have any questions or comments you'd like to share, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Let's bring Grant on and get started. Grant, welcome to the show. Welcome back.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is so good to see you. Now, Grant, without getting too far in the weeds on tax policy, the first question I have to ask you is, are you sure you can, in good faith, tell us that this wasn't one of those tricky tax swaps where you cut taxes in one place and raise them somewhere else? You didn't do that to the people of Mississippi, right?
We certainly did not. This was just a tax cut. There was no tax hikes, and we're putting more money back in the hands of hardworking Mississippians who need it now more than ever.
Thank you. All right, how much money? Let's just cut to the chase here, because you know this is what I want to know. How much money are the people of Mississippi really going to save here? And maybe it's over time. Break it down for us.
Yeah, so the Mississippi Tax Freedom Act of 2022, which passed a couple of weeks, was signed into law a couple of weeks ago anyway, is over $500 million tax cut over 4 years. Okay. So you're talking about real money, and $500 million may not sound like a ton. This is, you got big states around here. In a state like Mississippi, $500 million is a lot of money. Our whole state general fund budget is about $5.6 billion. So $500 million in 1 year back to the taxpayers is really meaningful. And, this was elimination of a whole tax bracket. So we took the 4% bracket, eliminated it, and we lowered the 5% down to 4%. Now we just have a flat, simple, easy to understand flat income tax. On our way towards one of these days, we're going to eliminate the whole thing.
And what does that mean for families in Mississippi in terms of their checkbooks and their pocketbooks?
Yeah, so it means for families, it's going to be just under $1,000 a year, where they're going to have more money for gas and milk and food. And, the other side of this is at a time where states are seeing so much money, one of the worst things we could have done is just grow the state and then raise taxes to cover that in years to come, because the growth wasn't there. So this was not only about getting dollars back into the wallets of hardworking Mississippians, but we also made sure we didn't create a bigger problem by growing government.
Well, yeah, you've now moved things in the correct direction to keep shrinking it.
That's right.
So we're going to start talking about your outstanding leadership in just a minute, because I know there's a story there. But before we get there, talk to me a little bit about the political landscape in Mississippi, the backdrop here that helped get us to a place where this was even possible.
Yeah, so Mississippi, as your audience probably knows, is a deep red Republican state. And we have Republican supermajorities in both chambers. We have a Republican governor. That doesn't always translate to big conservative reforms. But
well, you're talking to a South Carolina girl, so I understand that.
Right. So you get it. But I'll tell you, I am super proud that it did this year. And this is a big reform. So some of the backdrop was these lawmakers, and particularly the governor and the speaker of our Speaker of the House in Mississippi, really campaigned on eliminating Mississippi's income tax. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times, and they've said it, that the people of Mississippi know how to spend tax dollars better than the state does. So that was the backdrop, is that they largely were ideologically aligned and wanted to get something done. And then the reason this moment made it possible was we're seeing record surpluses, record revenue into the state coffers. And this started happening before COVID, but COVID, as a lot of states are experiencing, just tons of money. So we think $36 billion has been dumped into Mississippi from all different sources. And some of that's into counties and some of that's into individual families. But that's a ton of money swirling around in the market. And so this year we saw a $1 billion surplus. Last year we saw that. We're sitting on about $4.4 billion in reserves. So our fiscal house is in order. They've got more money than they know what to do with. We saw this as a once in a lifetime opportunity to cut a tax, not only give hardworking Mississippians more money this year, next year, the next year, but really set a standard that we don't want to penalize people for work, which is what an income tax is. So we have been working towards the full elimination of our state's income tax to put us in that conversation with Florida and Texas and Tennessee. This doesn't quite get there, but it's a great step in the right direction.
It is a great step. Was it a challenge for you to get bipartisan support for this?
You know, it actually was a challenge, but and at different points in the process, we weren't sure where the votes were going to land. But when the votes finally passed, and the House passed this and the Senate passed it in both chambers, this was a bipartisan bill. And it wasn't just one or two. There was a strong contingent of Democrats in both chambers who saw this as something they couldn't be against because it was putting more money back in their constituents' pockets too.
Well, tell us about Empower Mississippi's role in all of this and how you guys made this possible.
Well, honestly, this was a 2-year effort. And this started in the beginning of 2021 when we thought that this moment might be coming. And so we actually received a grant from SPN through the partnership with the Searle Foundation to do a dynamic economic model looking at what would happen if we cut Mississippi's income tax. And we partnered with 2 national economists, produced a 40-page report, and that helped create a foundation for a 2-year effort. And we took that and a lot of other analysis and just kept the conversation going. We ended up having 3 different people on the Empower team testify before a joint House and Senate hearing about this issue. Every time the House would come out with a new proposal, we would do analysis and explain how this would impact families. We did videos, we did blogs, we told stories about ordinary Mississippians who were going to benefit from this. And when all is said and done, we ended up with over 1,100 media mentions of our tax work just this year, over 4.3 million content views. And another piece that SPN really helped us out with was y'all helped with a grant to help us grow our owned audience. And so as we have built this audience of people that we have their emails, we can communicate with directly, we were able to engage them in this process. And that audience sent over 9,000 emails to Republicans in the Senate when we were really trying to move the needle. So couldn't be more proud of this team effort to get this across the finish line.
What do you think this means for the broader network who's working on these same kind of tax issues?
Well, even while we were working on this, we kept hearing from other states that were wanting to do something like this. And during the process, I kept seeing tweets from some of our sister organizations in West Virginia and Louisiana and Wisconsin and other states where they're working on tax reform and kept saying, we want to do what Mississippi's doing and challenging each other. And so I think that's part of why this is, we're a network of states, and states are laboratories of innovation trying different things. And honestly, this is a bigger reform than we've seen in some of our neighboring states. And yet we're able to look to other states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee who, kind of needled us after the facts and said, well, you didn't eliminate the income tax. And I said, well, we're coming for you.
Well, again, as someone from South Carolina who too often finds themselves at the bottom of the good list, and I think you can understand that being from Mississippi, Grant, I give you big props, and I hope you are coming for income tax next. So congratulations, job well done. Grant will be back with us in a few minutes for Q&A from the audience. Let's bring John Hendrickson up from Iowans for Tax Relief to tell us about the story from Iowa. John, welcome to the show. Got a slight Zoom delay. There you are. Okay, John, before we get started, it has to be said, you work for an organization called Iowans for Tax Relief. I hear that Iowa, of all places, literally had the worst tax code until this bill passed. And
Yes.
your organization name stands for itself. You've now earned the name. I hope that everybody working in your organization has been popping champagne and dancing on the ceiling since this victory. How does it feel?
Well, first, thanks, Rebecca, for having me on. It feels great. I mean, our organization started back in 1978. So we've been working towards that for, multiple decades. And really, we're neighboring some high tax states, especially Minnesota, especially Illinois, and we did not want to become Illinois. So really the tax reform movement started in 2018 with Governor Kim Reynolds, and she made that a priority. And so we were able to work with her immediately in sort of building a framework of what does pro-growth tax reform look like in Iowa. And
well, I saw her. She was all over the news saying,
yes,
we're going to get this done. So I assume you guys had something to do with that. How closely
we did.
you work with her?
Yeah, we also have a C4 organization, and so we had our government affairs staff as well as our vice president that met regularly with the governor's tax policy advisor. The governor even spoke at our tax day luncheon the day before she gave her response to President Biden's State of the Union address. And so we had a seat at the table, and not just with the governor, but also with key legislators that were in the process, both in the House and the Senate, working with both Ways and Means chairs and both leaders as well, and trying to promote these pro-growth ideas. And I have to say that our organization also, we were the leaders in terms of op-eds and research since 2018, trying to move the needle on this issue. And so, we were pretty pleased about that. And one unique thing is that Governor Reynolds often retweeted or reposted our articles and research on her social media sites. And so that was kind of an extra incentive for us that our message was getting out there, and that these ideas were getting heard by the governor and the legislature.
It's a really awesome that the governor and the legislature were leaning on your organization for this kind of information. They needed it in order to move forward and to get to this point. Did you see any change in the legislature this year in terms of their priorities and how they made tax reform a priority to get it done versus previous years?
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
One thing about Iowa is that since 2018, we've had Iowa's becoming more of a red state. So the Republicans are in control of both chambers of the legislature, and Governor Reynolds obviously is a Republican. But as Grant said, Republicans don't always do conservative things, but there's been some differences between the Senate and the House over tax policy. One thing though that we saw is that even before the pandemic, Governor Reynolds believes in prudent budgeting. And without prudent budgeting, you can't have tax reform because Iowa has to balance the budget. It can't be like the federal government where you can just run into deficit spending. And so before the pandemic, Iowa was running a surplus. Last year, we had $1 billion surplus. So going into this session, we had over $1 billion, and that drove the agenda to cut taxes. And so immediately before the session, Governor Reynolds, the Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitford, and the Speaker of the House, Pat Grassley, were all on the same page saying we need to have substantial tax cuts for Iowa taxpayers. And also because they understood that states are engaging in tax reform across the nation, and Iowa needs to be more competitive economically. So that created a framework for the largest tax cut in our history, which by 2026 will have a flat tax at 3.9%. And also we're lowering our corporate tax. We used to have one of the highest corporate taxes in the nation. And that will soon in the next few years be a flat 5.5%.
Wow. So it sounds like you had a shift in your legislature from a habit of spending money for months and
Yes.
months and months, and then thinking about saving
Yeah.
money if that ever came
The
up
one-
to, hey, let's talk about tax savings and then do spending.
Yeah, and that's one thing. Our tax bill passed early in the session, which meant that for the first time, taxpayers were placed first
Wow.
before spending interest. And that's usually the tax bill comes at the very end of session. Here we had it right at the beginning. There was agreement on this historic tax bill, which came before, because there's, I mean, just like any other state or even at the federal level, there's so many people looking for either additional funding or new funding. Here we saw the taxpayers finally get the first priority at the table. And so that's also a good thing because then it helps craft a more conservative budget as well to keep conservative spending in line.
As it should be in all 50 states. Now,
Absolutely, yeah.
John, you've got some great cutting edge ideas around tax relief, and you are brilliant, but even you have told me you haven't come up with all of these ideas all on your own. So can you tell us a little bit about what kind of people you're talking with, where you're coming up with some of these ideas?
Well, this is where I always say that, the State Policy Network is a blessing because we can tap in to a lot of organizations. So we had help from Ray Haderman and the Buckeye Institute. Ray has a great team that helped us do modeling. I think they did 3 or 4 different modeling scenarios for us over the last few years. And that the first one they did for us actually helped us have that seat at the table with the governor because their model reflected what she originally proposed to do a few years ago. So working with Ray was very good. We worked with Van Skin at Texas Public Policy Foundation, also on tax reform and also on conservative budgeting principles. One of my favorites was working with the John Locke Foundation, North Carolina. I've always argued that John Locke is the gold standard of state tax reform because they've balanced keeping spending low and cutting rates. And so for example, I worked a lot with Joe Coletti, who he's no longer there, but Joe and I worked closely together, learning about North Carolina's system and applying what they've done to Iowa. And so we worked with a number of different groups. One issue that came up in Iowa was, of course, liberals will always wave the flag of Kansas. Well, if you cut taxes, it'll end up to be like Kansas. So we worked closely with Dave Traubert at the Kansas Policy Institute. And Dave wrote an incredible book debunking the liberal lies about the Kansas tax cut. And what they did is they slashed rates and increased spending, which you can't do. And so Dave was tremendous in helping us respond to some of those arguments from the left on why you shouldn't cut taxes. So, I mean, within the network, it was tremendous help. And the other thing that I just want to mention is that Michael Lucci, who's a fellow with State Policy Network, had invited me to join a working group on economic recovery. This started up during COVID. And that group had a collection of us from about a dozen states. We not only shared ideas, but also looking at different models on how to do tax reform. And those ideas were extremely helpful for us. And Michael, even today, Michael is always checking in to see how things are going. And so, we did a fly-in to the SPN headquarters there in Virginia. And that was very helpful because, we can sit across a table with each other, share ideas. And that really helps because it helps in our research. It helps in the ideas because a lot of times policymakers, they want ideas, they want solutions, not just the talking points. And so, if we can come up and say, here's a model that's worked and here's how to do it, then we get a better audience from policymakers when we can do that.
John, yeah, thank you for breaking that down. We often at SPN will call that the network effect, when one state will connect with so many others in our network to hear what's going on in their state and be a part of this working group of brain power. You can take these ideas and accelerate them, test them, run with them, tweak them to work in their state. So good to hear.
And can I just share one more thing about
Sure.
that? I want to the late Bob Williams, and many people on the call might know Bob Williams, and he was tremendous. Bob, when I first started working in the think tank movement in 2006, it was Bob Williams who introduced me to sound budgeting principles. And we had Bob out here a few years ago give a workshop, and we also had about 5 other SPN think tanks there as well, benefiting from Bob's wisdom on prudent budgeting. And so, Bob was just a tremendous blessing to the movement.
Well, I think Bob is a force that touched just about everybody.
Yes, yeah.
His spirit will continue to make an impact.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you. Well, let's bring Grant back on. We've got time for a few questions from the audience, and I've got a couple that folks submitted even before we got started. So if you've got a few, please add them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. First question is from our friend Ed Johnson. Ed, I'm so glad you're watching. It's good to just to know that you're here. It's been a few weeks since we've seen you. Ed, I love your question. It's one I had as well, and this is for both of you. I'd love to hear your take. How do you guys see these reforms impacting other states, spreading to other states? The national impact piece here is so important right now, especially as I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Don't mean to be so harsh on the federal government, but they're not much help here right now. So, what do you see here? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'll just say, I think I see the effect, and I see the importance of this work that both John, y'all are doing, and we're doing, and so many other states are doing. And I think part of the issue is it's so important that we use this moment not to cement bad habits. And it's just, lawmakers' eyes get big when they see all of this revenue coming in. And I'm telling you, the group of lobbyists at the Capitol this year, with every pet project that's been on the back burner that they think we have money for, let's spend it. And it's often recurring expenditures that would just grow the state and create a huge burden for people. So when you start to see states like Mississippi and Iowa and others that say, no, we're keeping a cap on the growth of government, and we're going to send money back to the taxpayers, I think you set an example for other states, and a cautionary tale for some like California to say, don't do it. People are leaving those states. They're moving to states like ours. And I think that's one way we can set an example during these times and make sure we don't cement bad habits.
I would agree with that. In fact, we're seeing, for example, not North Carolina, but Nebraska pay very close attention to what Iowa just did, and also some of our neighboring states that are watching. And it's also going to put additional pressure on us. So, for example, I'm not sure if it's going to pass, but the Missouri legislature is considering a bill that would phase out their corporate income tax. If they do that, that's going to put pressure on Iowa to speed up our corporate rate reductions, because one thing, states cannot be complacent right now, because we're seeing tax rates matter. And as Grant said, people are voting with their feet. They're leaving. There's a mass exodus going on. Our neighbors to the north in Minnesota, they almost lost a congressional district because of population loss. And Illinois is a disaster. People are leaving, and so states have to be competitive. And so I think they're looking at what Governor Reynolds has done, that formula of keeping spending low, reducing tax rates, and you can still fund the priorities of government. And look at the difference between some of these states, red versus blue. you see the disaster that's going on in California, that these liberal tax and spend policies don't work. And, as Reagan said, you can't tax and spend your way to prosperity.
Yeah. All right. Next question. What's next, Grant? You mentioned income tax reform. Is that next on your tax list?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. So we've made no bones about the fact that from day one, our goal is to eliminate our income tax. We think it can be done. That's what our dynamic economic model showed, is that we can fund the functions of government that need to be funded. And part of the case we need to make is it's not necessarily about saying we're going to starve the beast, although that's certainly probably compelling to people on this call. I think the model shows that in the long term, we will raise more revenue and have more growth if we eliminated the income tax, not less. And so, yeah, that's certainly the goal. I think it's probably going to take a couple of years because people are going to want to see the impact of this. But this was a good half step towards that. It makes it, I think, more likely that we will get there when people see the sky didn't fall and we need to fully eliminate. And we're sitting here in a part of the country with 3 surrounding states that don't have an income tax: Tennessee, Florida, and Texas. But the states right next to us, Alabama and Louisiana, do. And I'll tell you, I talked to some colleagues in Louisiana. They were worried about the fact that we were going to eliminate, and it just would attract more business and put the bullseye on them. So that's where we're headed.
Good. John, same question. What's next in Iowa?
Well, also looking at income tax, we have what's called a taxpayer relief fund, which is any surplus dollars that once we have full reserves, they go into this fund, and we have over $1 billion in there right now. That's supposed to increase close to $2 billion maybe by the end of this year. And so we're going to look for ways to using that fund to maybe eliminate the income tax. But the other thing is, because we've made such progress, it's now put pressure on property tax. And so I think that's going to be a big thing next year. Is property tax is a huge issue in Iowa. It's out of control. And so we're going to be looking for solutions on that. And one thing, if I could just say quick, Rebecca, is out of that working group came a solution for property tax reform. Dave Traubert from Kansas Policy Institute has been working with us very closely on replicating a strong truth in taxation law, which has already shown really good results in Kansas. It's doing the same. Utah has had a similar law since the 80s. And so we're hoping to push very hard for that next year.
That's great to hear. Well, John, Grant, thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for your time. For those of you who are tuning in, thank you for making their work possible and for our work possible. I can't thank you enough. There are good things happening in the states right now, while Washington is very slow to respond. And when they are responding, it's just not always, it's just not very often with the kind of solutions that are making the difference that we need to see. So thank goodness for the states. Thank goodness for all of you. And we will keep at it and bring you some more good news soon. Talk to you soon. Thanks for everything. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.